So Purim is over, and it was time for me to take out my Haggadah and begin planning our Passover Seder. More important this year because for the very first time, we are inviting all of you, all of the members of our congregation into our homes, into the rabbis and cantors' homes for the first night of Seder, knowing that there are many of you that still cannot be with the families and friends that you love. So I open up my Haggadah, and of course it opens to the one phrase that I always find enigmatic. My father was a wandering Aramaean. What does that mean? And so I decided this year, because all of you will be in my home with me for the Seder, maybe I should actually prepare and do some research. And I found that it's really not as difficult as I thought, because it turns out that Abraham and Sarah, our forefather and foremother, were from Padam Aram. And so one might interpret this to mean that our father, our ancestors, Abraham and Sarah, were wandering Arameans. They were nomads, if you will. And they were known for opening up their tent to strangers for hospitality. So this past week, I received a call from a gentleman in Connecticut who informed me that he was my second cousin twice removed. And we began playing a little Jewish geography. He asked me some questions. And then he said, you know, I knew your grandfather, Paul. And we used to gather at your grandparents' house. And Paul was an amazing human being. He entertained everyone, he philosophized, he told stories, he made everyone feel welcome. Sometimes there were 30 cousins. We were all eating borscht and cabbage and stuffed cabbage and so on. But your grandfather, he was really a special person in my life. And it got me to thinking about what would have happened if my grandfather, Paul, had not had the opportunity to flee Russia ahead of the conscription into the Russian army, which in those days was both a life sentence and a death sentence, if he had not been able to immigrate to this land of freedom. And I think what would have happened if there had not been a HIAS, a Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, to help him and my grandmother get started. They actually started with a newspaper route in Brooklyn, and they saved up enough shekels to buy a small like a soda fountain store in a Park Slope, where my daughter now lives, by the way, and eventually to buy an apartment building. What would have happened if there had not been a HIAS to start them into their new life? And so instead of talking this evening about the many very difficult issues of immigration, I thought I would share with you three of the wandering Aramaeans who have made an impact on my life and really inform my thinking when I do think of immigration and immigration policy. The first was my grandfather, Paul, of blessed memory. And by the way, that is why I was named by a rabbi and a Jewish educator after a Christian saint, because it was my grandfather, Pavel or Paul. My second wandering Aramaean. So my mother, as many of you have heard, was a leading Soviet Jewry activist. And when that sort of subsided, she got very involved in bringing other immigrants to this country, most especially during the Vietnamese boat people crisis. And she helped set people up in these poor people. They were just fleeing from the most horrible oppression. And she helped set them up in jobs and in homes. She would get cars donated and so on. But one family they couldn't find a home for, and so they came to live with us for a few months. And the man's name was Trong, and he came with his elderly mother. And my mother was able to find him a job in a local factory doing menial work because he had no English. And they, as I said, they lived with us, and eventually she found them a car. And Trong actually ended up doing very well. He found a beautiful wife. He was hired by a casino in Atlantic City, who found that his lack of English was not a deficit, but rather an advantage, because they figured that without English, he would be less likely to conspire with the customers to cheat the house. And so he actually did quite well. And the first Thanksgiving after they came to America, we are sitting around our Thanksgiving table. We're smelling the aroma of the turkey baking in the kitchen. And suddenly there's a knock at the door, 4 o'clock, right before dinner. And in walks Trong with a huge frozen turkey as a gift to us. We didn't have the heart to tell him that we already had a turkey in the oven and that it would take at least 24 hours to thaw the turkey that he had brought. We actually gave it to charity. But every single Thanksgiving from that time on until my mother died many years later, Tron would knock on the door on Thanksgiving and bring us a frozen turkey. And that frozen turkey meant more to me, I think, than all of the beautifully prepared ones that we ate and enjoyed. The third wandering Aramaean I want to introduce you to tonight is also named Yedweb. I haven't met him yet either. This is my great, 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 great grandson. Let's call him Yankele Yedweb. And Yankele grows up in a Jewish home, the son of my great, great, great grandchild. And also his mother was a Jew by choice, is a Jew by choice, will be a Jew by choice. Unfortunately, in Yankele's situation, anti-Semitism arises in his land, and he is forced to flee to the land of Israel. And actually, this story has a very happy ending. Yankele flees to Israel, is accepted with open arms into our land of refuge, finds a nice Sabra to marry, raises a family, and lives happily ever after. Now, Yankele's story has a happy ending because of an event that happened way, way, way back in his past. In fact, this very week in 2021, when the Israeli Supreme Court decided to uphold the place of Israel as a refuge for all Jews by declaring that the converts, that the Jews by choice that are converted by Reform and conservative rabbis are included in the law of return and do have a place in our holy land, in our homeland. Israel traditionally is our land of refuge. It is the place that we can go to be safe, no matter what is happening in the world. It's the reason that at the end of the Passover Seder, we say next year in Jerusalem. That is the place of Israel in our lives. And you know what? I want to end this sermon with a celebration of the fact that the Israeli Supreme Court has made Yankele's story a happy ending. Friends, I don't know what your politics are, and I don't know how you feel about whichever administration's policies you are critiquing or praising. But for me, what I would ask is that you think of it not as politics, but as people. And this Passover Seder, I am going to ask you that during that section where you read about the wandering Aramaean, that you tell the stories to your children and to your grandchildren about the wandering Aramaeans in your history. And you help them understand that we are all wandering Aramaeans. We are all strangers in a strange land. And we do have a sacred obligation to see the welcoming of strangers, just like Abraham and Sarah in our Bible, the original wandering Aramaeans, that we have the obligation to open our tents and to welcome the strangers with love and graciousness. And perhaps they'll bring you a turkey someday. Shabbat Shalom.